Welcome back to the Pirates Cave Origins documentary. We've talked to you about the writing of the script, the editing, the sound effects, passes, and all that fun post-production stuff. So coming up next, we're going to talk to you about the most challenging phase of this show yet. Programming actual physical DMX lights on set to sync with a video edited show. So having previously worked with multi-screen presentations in the past, I was familiar with a workflow where you use what's called a puppet show. This is a mini mock-up of a large-scale multi-screen presentation that involves physical lights and effects, as well as actors. The first step in this process was to create a mock-up picture of what this set would look like even before it was constructed. We then took the still into Premiere and began to sequence our effects from there.
I took the still that my dad created on Photoshop and I popped it into Premiere. This is the first time I was able to see both screens playing simultaneously. It was at this point we saw that we had too much variation happening on our two screens, so we had to tone it back to make sure that it wasn't too much of a distraction. The puppet show allowed us to sequence the actors, the props, and the effects all in one. The effects included 18 DMX lights, 2 fog machines, water effects, and air cannons. The props included the fire, the treasure chest, and the captain at the wheel. Last but not least was the actors. We sequenced their actions for what they would be doing during the show. We had 6 actors playing 9 parts during the show, and each actor got their own number so they could see what they were going to be doing for the whole duration of the show. When the puppet show was completed, we sent it out to our actors so they could familiarize themselves with what roles they would be playing during the show, so they could prepare themselves for their first dress rehearsal night.
While Jacob was still programming the show in his room, I began to piece together all the hardware we had ordered. This hardware consisted of the FlexMax show controller, numerous relays, the controllable AC outlet extension box, as well as the 4-channel dimmer box. Up to this point, I had never dealt with any of this hardware before, even the DMX lights, so there was a lot of learning to do. Before making the purchase, I had checked around with a few haunters and they were recommending different pieces of hardware that I did some research on. So having lots of experience with peekaboo controllers, I decided to go with the FlexMax. So the FlexMax was exciting because it had 16 outputs. This is the kind of controller that's designed mostly for escape rooms, so I knew it would have lots of flexibility and it handled the job great for us. The first 8 channels of output were dedicated to the AC outlet extender box. This extender box allowed us just to turn on and off 120 volt devices as we needed. The next piece of hardware was a 120 volt dimmable 4-channel AC outlet box. The original intent for having this box was to control our lightning effect. This would allow us to quickly brighten the light but then dim it down slowly if need be. The last thing we had to add was relays. You see, the FlexMax controls 1.5 amps maximum, but there's other devices like the fog machine that require more than 1.5 amps. That means they need to be connected through a relay. I know all this stuff sounds really confusing, and it was to me initially, but I eventually worked my way through it with online help. So the 2 problems we had with this motherboard box were with the relays and the DMX lights. We had 18 DMX lights, 2 projectors, 2 air cannons, and 1 water valve. All of these devices were controlled via the DMX chain. So DMX devices can be daisy chained one from the other. If you have one light, you've got an input and then an output, and you can go take that output into the input of an additional light. And so it goes from all the lights to the projectors to all the other devices in the chain. So in total, we had 24 devices on this chain. During our initial testing, we had all kinds of trouble where certain lights just would not work or whole batches of lights would begin to flicker. Also, at the beginning, we couldn't get our 2 projectors to start up at the right time and also simultaneously. During some of our troubleshooting of the DMX channel, we realized that some of the problems were introduced by the AC outlet dimmer box. We realized that when we took that device out of the DMX chain, it seemed to improve the signal, but not entirely. So we began to troubleshoot by swapping out DMX cables, adding terminators, switching light locations on the chain, as well as removing hardware from the chain. We spent a good 3 or 4 nights scratching our head out there each and every night trying to deal with these issues. We got to the point where we were highly concerned about whether we could pull this off or not. Being involved in the video industry, I was aware of distribution amplifiers, as well as my friend John mentioned it at one point, maybe we could somehow boost the signal. I began to do some research on boosting DMX signals or amplifying DMX signals. There wasn't a whole lot of information about it, and also people were kind of against it. I figured though, what the heck, let's try some kind of booster device and see what happens. We've got nothing to lose. So I was on Facebook Marketplace and I saw a fellow selling a used DMX branch. This is basically a distribution amplifier where you have one DMX signal coming into a box and then it splits it out into 4. It boosts the signal and splits it out into 4 channels. So that night, we split up the first 10 DMX lights onto the first channel. We split up the next 8 DMX lights onto the second channel, and we put our projectors on the third channel. Lo and behold, that solved all of our problems just with that one addition. Overnight, we went from sheer frustration to sheer elation to see everything working as it was supposed to.
After my dad figured out all the problems with the motherboard, I began programming all of the lights for our show on the Director software from Fright Props. The Director software is a free application on the Fright Props website and is used to program the FlexMax controller. My dad suggested I should start out easy, so I began to program our AC outlets, which controls the first 8 outputs on the controller. Keep in mind, I was still programming the show in my room, so we would use a single light to indicate whether the device would be on or off. The next step was to program the DMX lights, but at the time, nothing was constructed out front, so I had to program these lights in my room. I would work with 4 lights at a time, and I would number them with tape and put them on the light. Each light then needed to be added to the Director software. When you add the light to the Director software, it then assigns a DMX address that you have to input onto the back of the light. I had to export the show audio from Premiere and import it to Director so I could listen to certain cues so I could program the show. I would also reference the puppet show for certain cues for when I had to turn stuff on. For each 4 lights, I had to program their actions for the entire show before I could swap them out with the next pair of 4. I continued to program each light this way until I finished all 18 DMX lights. The last bit of programming I had to do was the water effects, air cannons, and the treasure chest opening and closing. I completed 80% of the programming in my room before anything was even constructed for the haunt.
So after our rough programming was completed, we began to build. On the last week of September, as usual, we had our actors come out and help us build. They were very excited to get out of the house with all this COVID craziness. So I have to say that out of all the challenges we've had in this project, building was probably the easiest part of it all. Since we wrote our story around props and scenes we already had from the previous year, construction was much easier. We did have some new props that needed to be built this year. Those included the structure that supported the chest, as well as the air cannon boxes. We also had to build the PVC water conduit that brought water to our 3 towers. The chest support also included a 3-face facade that we wanted to make it look like dirt at one point in the show, but also yet fire in another part of the show. We first stapled orange lights to the wood and then covered it with plastic pieces of material. This lent itself to a more uneven surface. After that, we added expanding foam to give us the look we needed. The last step was to paint it. We were always relying on our good friend Rich Guerrero, who's a professional painter, to help come in and give us some consulting on how to paint our props. One of the last construction challenges we had were our video screens. You see, we wanted the flexibility to be able to project onto the screen and see a great video image, but then if we also stop the projection and backlit it, you'd be able to see through it. This takes a very specialized material called a scrim. It's a material they use in stage shows all the time, where if you project on the front, you can have a backdrop or any kind of design that you've painted on it. But also if you turn off that front light and rear project it, you can then see through it and see additional props or actors behind it. We knew with having these screens set up in the yard and where the garage door would be, we would have lots of creative options. We purchased and tested 2 different materials that failed us until we finally decided on the correct stuff. So in the next episode of Origins Behind the Screens, we're going to talk about my favorite part in this whole process. We finally had the opportunity to test our DMX lights with our brand new constructed stage. Stay tuned.